the 10 best knitting techniques of all time. Hi everyone, Norman here. Today's video is super special because I will show you my favorite knitting techniques. Increases, decreases, bind-offs, cast-ons that I use the most and why. Special stitches I use to achieve impeccable results that make other people comment, "This looks like done by a machine," or "I wish I had your stitch definition." Let's dive right into it. But before I start, I have a little request. If you have a favorite knitting technique you feel needs to be shared with the world, then absolutely comment now. Help me turn this video and the comment section into a repository of awesome techniques. And if you read a technique in the comments that deserves an upvote, then please do that as well. Technique number 1, lifted increases. So I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was knitting this cute little bunny pattern by the talented Julie from Little Cotton Rabbits, and she was the one who introduced me to lifted increases. That was 15 years ago, and I've never ever looked back. So you pick up the strand 2 rows below, 1 and 2. This loop here, this left loop, you pick it up and lift it back to your knitting needle, and then you simply knit that through the back loop, and that's already it. This is called KLL, knit left loop, or sometimes left lifted increase. You can of course also do the same on the other side. So you go here, 1 row below, 1, this here, and then you lift that back to the knitting needle and knit it, and there is your increase. This is called KRL, knit right loop, and both increases can be incredibly invisible for stockinette stitch. This here is the central increase line of one of my shawl patterns, and it's done using lifted increases. There are no holes, there are no eyelets. I just feel it's magic. And this could be your raglan increase line, this could be the increase line of your toe-up socks. I feel lifted increases can be just so powerful. Now, lifted increases really go way beyond just actual increasing. So here I am knitting a pair of socks. I finished my heel flap and I turned the heel, and now I need to pick up stitches here from the heel flap. But before I do that, I will actually place a lifted increase. So when I was young, people told me, well, I need to increase into this leg here, and I always did that, and it never really looked nice. So these days I will actually here go into this stitch here and knit a lifted increase to bridge the gap. I will decrease that lifted increase in the very next round right away. So I will do the lifted increase, and then I will pick up my stitches here from my edge. So, you know, either with a crochet hook or with the knitting needle, both works. But here right at the gap I place a lifted increase, same here over on the other side to bridge the gap. And then this here will be the result, same here over here on the other side. There is no gap, no hole, no eyelet. So whenever you need to bridge a gap, may that be here around the gusset for your socks, or I don't know, underneath the arm of your sweater or so, use a lifted increase to fill the gap, or at least I do. Personally speaking, I really like SSK, slip slip knit. So some people don't, and for them it creates sloppy results. For me, it simply is the neatest and easiest way to achieve a left-leaning decrease line, but with a twist. So I start my SSKs the normal way. So I slip 2 knitwise here close to the tip of the knitting needles, then I enter and knit through the back loop. But then I yank this here out, And then for the next stitch, I enlarge this stitch beyond what I normally would to carry over a bit of the slack. And then for the next stitch, I do exactly the same. So let's do that one more time. So slip close to the tip, knit through the back loop, pull through, yank. This closes this stitch here. Enlarge a little bit and continue knitting. This is how I do my SSKs. But I actually don't stop there, because in the next row or round, when I come across the SSK here, then I will always knit that twisted. So I'm knitting flat, so I will purl that through the back loop. If this was a project in the round, I would of course knit it through the back loop. Again, here see, this is the double stitch, or the double wrap created by the SSK. And then I will knit that or purl that through the back loop in the next row or round. So if you've ever been wondering how I achieve these super neat left-leaning decrease lines here for the gusset of this pair of socks that are near indistinguishable from their knit together from their right-leaning counterparts, then this is my process. I yank out the excess and then I twist them in the next row around, and as you can see, this line isn't twisted. So I have quite a lot of tutorials showing you different left-leaning increases, some of them fancier, some of them easier. Use whatever you feel works best. But I am using SSK, and then I twist it in the next round in 95% of all cases. The question I get possibly asked the most is, Norman, how do I join in a new color? And personally speaking, I use a technique called twist and weave in 90% of all cases. So I pick up my yarn here with the left hand. If you are an English knitter, do it with the left hand. For the next stitch, continue English knitting. This stitch, do it with your left hand. Then enter this stitch, the first stitch, as if to knit, and then take your yarn and place it here in between those two knitting needles, and then bring it around like so and secure it with your thumb, but here these cross and this stays in front. Then take the tail and cross it with your new yarn, then pick up, secure that with your thumb, pick up the tail, then guide it back here in between those two knitting needles and around the other knitting needle. And now, so pull down a little bit, and now take this knitting needle and wrap it around the knitting needle once, pick up the tail again, bring it back. Sorry, you didn't see that. So bring it back. And now you need to pull down. Pull down. Pull all the way down. And this will create a sort of knot-like structure. If you've ever knitted German short rows where you also pull down, this is, you pull down. And now you should have a little loop here, see? There's a little loop on your knitting needle, and you need to guide this through the knitting needle. So here, this tail, get it out of the way, and then guide this loop here through the stitch, tighten up, pull here, pull on the tails once, and then continue knitting. So see here in the next row, when I come across the stitch and I knit it, it just stays put. It doesn't wear out or anything, and that is the very, very big advantage of this technique. Of course, here you need to take care of these tails here, but they are secure. Weave them in as you go. Typically, I use a tapestry needle, and you create a little knot-like structure. This will be obviously visible, so it's not suitable for a reversible project, obviously. But for all other projects, I feel this is perfect and my preferred way. A lot of projects require mid-row cast-ons in either direction, so buttonholes come to mind, but also gloves or mittens here, like these ones here, when you need to bridge the gaps here for the thumbs or for the other fingers. And a lot of patterns do this using an E-cast-on, but I never do this. So here is the trick. A lot of old patterns will, when it comes to buttonholes, thumbs of mittens or so, will tell you to use a single cast-on, E-cast-on or whatever to bridge the gap. So you will cast on 3 or 4 stitches like so, and then you can join in the round, continue knitting, whatever. Personally speaking, I would say this is very easy to do. However, knitting across those 4 stitches 1 row later is typically not easy at all, and you kind of need to force your needle through, and the edge actually looks a little bit sloppy. So that's why I never use it. Instead, I will use a knitted cast-on. Now, the knitted cast-on works in this direction. So here's the trick. If you need to cast on stitches here in this direction, I simply turn my project around and then I cast on purl stitches, because these purl stitches will appear as knit stitches on the right side later on. I cast on using the knitted cast on purlwise, and then when I need to continue knitting in the normal direction, I turn around. But I have here stitches that are much easier to work through. I have a much more stable edge here that doesn't wear out as much. And then I can pick up stitches from that a lot easier. And this is one of the reasons why here the gaps here between my thumbs typically look so neat, because I use a stable way to bridge it. And that way I don't end up with holes or anything here around the fingers either. And there's a nice and neat transition all the way around. And here is another way to do a mid-row cast-on that creates an edge that is a lot more stable. So start by wrapping the yarn around the needle once, and then you grab that first loop and pass it over, just like a bind off or so. Wrap again twice, grab this first loop here, pass it over. So this here kind of tries to replicate a long tail cast-on. Technically speaking, it's a little bit different, but it creates an edge and the first row in the same breath, but using one yarn only. And this also creates a very, very stable edge here that actually looks a lot like the long tail cast-on. And I feel when it comes to bridging gaps and avoiding holes, then those are really 2 techniques that help me personally a lot, because when it comes to knitting gloves like this here, this makes all the difference. You know, when a lot of people always ask me, well, Norman, why do your gloves always look so perfect? Why are there no gaps, no holes? Why do they look like knit with the machine? Well, then I always tell them, well, because I use these techniques and these make all the difference. A lot of people love the tubular cast-on, and sure enough, for a hat, like a simple rib beanie like this one here, it can look very, very nice. However, I hate knitting it, and if you need to cast on 200 stitches or so in the round, it's just a nightmare. Plus, for socks, I actually don't like the way it looks. Instead, I typically use alternating cast-ons such as this one here. Now there are many ways to do this, and I want to show you a couple of them. Let's start with something simple. So this here is a slip knot, and this here is the standard long tail cast on. Let's suppose I want to cast on for 2x2 rib stitch. So I have one stitch, my slip knot, my first stitch, and this is the second stitch, and I want to cast on a 2x2 rib stitch. So I need a purl stitch now. This means I need to go around the index finger from behind and grab the yarn towards the thumb from below, pull through, tighten up. One more time, slingshot. Go around the index finger, come in from behind, grab the yarn towards the thumb from below, pull through, tighten up. Now I have 2 purl stitches. This means I need another 2 knit stitches, and I do this with the standard long tail cast on you are hopefully familiar with. And then 2 more purl stitches. 1 and 2. And then you simply continue and according to your pattern and cast on however many stitches you need, because the long tail cast on already creates the first row in the same breath. So this is the actual cast on, this is the first row, and you can decide whether that has a V at its base or here this little bump. Now there are many variations you can actually try out yourself. But first of all, when I actually start a project in the round, I typically start with a simple twisted loop like this. Saw this? A simple twisted loop, because the slip knot obviously leaves behind a knot, and this can sometimes be less than ideal and very noticeable. Now there's also the German twisted cast on. So the German twisted cast on goes like this. You come in here from behind and grab the yarn like so. Let's do that one more time. So there's quite a lot happening at once there. I have a full tutorial that really dissects this cast on in slow motion if you need to catch up. You can also do the German twisted cast on purlwise. A bit trickier to knit, admittedly, especially now in summer. So I can do German twisted cast on knitwise and purlwise. However, I can also do German twisted cast on, followed by 2 long tail cast ons, purlwise. Or I do 2 normal long tail cast ons, and then 2 German twisted cast ons purlwise. So why is this useful? So I cast on 7 stitches using the standard long tail cast on here, and then followed by 7 using the German twisted cast on. This is just a purl stitch used as a divider. And if you zoom in, you can see that here, this is the actual cast on, this is the first row, cast on first row. Here the cast on just wraps once around the base of the stitch. Here for the German twisted cast on, you can see that it's twisted, well, it appears to be twisted. Appears to be twisted around once. Can you see that? Here, see, this is the actual cast on stitch here. This is the actual cast on stitch. This is not the first row. The first row is this here. However, this here appears to be twisted, so it can be a nice choice for twisted stitches. Suppose your pattern continues with knit through the back loop, purl through the back loop, Bavarian twisted stitches, whatever, then this can be nice. Well, whereas this here looks so much better for stockinette stitch or so. Now, in the previous example, you might have gone, well, I still kind of prefer the long tail cast on over the look of the German twisted cast on. Now, this here is seed stitch, and I started it using an alternating German twisted cast on. 1 knitwise, 1 purlwise. 1 German twisted cast on knitwise, 1 purlwise. And look at just how invisible this cast on is. I mean, it almost looks a little bit like this was, I don't know, a tubular cast on kind of for the seat stitch. So it's really mix and match, and I really love alternating cast-ons. I am a big fan of cables, possibly because I grew up in Bavaria and cables are the defining element of our traditional patterns. So as a result, I learned very early on to knit cables without a cable needle, and I can't even remember the last time I actually touched a cable needle. So here's how I do cables. So let's do a left cross first. So for a left cross, meaning these two stitches come out on top, I enter my knitting needle here through the back loop of these two stitches. Then I use my thumb to press these stitches here against the other knitting needle, remove the knitting needle. Now these stitches here are live, and then I pick them up right away. And then I can slip these two stitches back to the knitting needle. I have my cross, and now I can knit them or purl them, whatever my cable requires. So this is just knit stitches, but you can also cross into purl stitches. And if I want to do a right cross, meaning these two stitches come out on top, I do a very similar thing. So I enter these two stitches through the front, then I use my index finger to press them against the knitting needle, release them and pick them up right away, slip them back to the knitting needle point to point, and then work them according to the pattern. And this is how I do my cables. This also works for 1x1 cables. So here's a 1x1 cable here, like so. Very easy, very efficient. Here would be a 1x1 cable in the other direction. So again, use the index finger, shuffle around. There really is no need to be afraid, and knit them. Now if you want to be super fancy and you're afraid of dropping the stitches, you can knit these mini 1x1 cables also without it. So you enter here in between those stitches, dive into the stitch and knit it. Then bring the yarn here towards the back, and then you knit into this stitch here as well. And there is your little mini cable without the shuffling. It also works in the other direction, then it's actually even easier. Knit, knit, drop, and there would be your little 1x1 right crossing mini cable. Oops. And then you continue knitting. So I'm not even joking that other than for tutorials, I haven't touched a regular cable needle in decades. And if you are wondering, so if you've been wondering how on earth can anyone or me knit complicated cable designs such as these socks here, well, I don't use a cable needle, otherwise you would go insane. And if you are wondering how to knit neater cables like without loose stitches or so, then definitely subscribe to my Patreon account on the highest tiers, because I do have a masterclass on how to knit neat cables, how to fix them, and so on. I personally love provisional cast-on. So earlier I showed you these socks here that come with this lovely double cuff here, and this was of course achieved by using a provisional cast-on. However, I really have an issue with counting, so I used every trick in the book, like placing stitch markers every 10 stitches or so. It just doesn't work. If you ever wanted to torture me, then ask me to knit a shawl bottom up with a cast-on of 500 stitches, and trust me, even a decade later I would still be there trying. So when I need to knit a provisional cast-on, I always do it with a crochet hook. So this is super simple. You start with a slip knot any way you like, and then you just chain 3, 4, 5 stitches. It doesn't really matter. You are not actually using that bit. And then you take your knitting needle and place it here in between your working yarn and your crochet hook and your live stitch. And then you continue your chain, but you chain around the knitting needle. So you always chain, chain one, and then bring the yarn to the back. Chain one, bring the yarn to the back. And I don't know what it is, but this slow process kind of puts me in control, and I can count these stitches very, very easily at my own leisure. So some people also do the chain first and then pick up stitches from it, but I feel that makes counting, then I need to count my chain and a roundabout, and that's also a source of trouble for me. So here I just chain all those chain stitches and then stop whenever I need to stop. And if I cast on one stitch too many, well, then I can simply unravel that, easy as that. And once I've cast on the required number of stitches, I chain another 3 or 4 or 5 stitches, pull the yarn through, and sometimes I also add a knot. So if it's a project in the round or so, I add a knot so I know, okay, this is the end where I need to start unraveling from, and then you can just continue knitting across. There's just one important bit. So typically I don't use a special joining method. However, here in the very first row, you need to knit across. If you have a pattern that is in ribbing or any other knit purl combinations, knit across the first row, otherwise the chain won't unravel properly. That's why you need to knit across in the first row only, then you can start with your ribbing or whatever. This is very important. And I quickly want to use this occasion to show you another favorite technique of mine. So I knitted across 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I will do 1 row of knit together, yarn over. Knit together, yarn over. Knit together, yarn over. You could also purl across this row, but I'm going to show you how to do a very nice little sawtooth, well, picot edge or whatever. So 1 row here of knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over, and I finish here with a knit stitch because this is not in the round. And then I knit another 4 rows in stockinette stitch. So I turn around and knit another 4 rows in plain stockinette stitch. So I have an equal number of rows on either side of this central row of, well, knit 2 together, yarn over this, well, lace pattern, I guess. So I knitted another 4 rows. This is the result. And now I can unravel my little crochet chain here. To pick up my stitches. This is my first stitch here. Come on, don't unravel. My first stitch here, and then I just pick up the stitches as I unravel. And as you can see, I am using here a knitting needle that is slightly thinner, well, actually much thinner, because I feel it makes this process a little bit easier, but you can use whichever spare needle you have at hand, as long as it isn't actually thicker than the knitting needle you've been working with. Now you should have an equal number of stitches on both needles, and now you can fold things over like so. Pick up your knitting needle, and now you simply knit these two layers together. So you always knit into one stitch on the front needle, followed by one stitch on the back needle. Takes a little bit of practice. You could also slip them to a separate needle first, but typically I don't. And if you see some of the stitches are twisted from picking up, well, then just untwist them or knit them through the back loop, whatever you prefer. Didn't work. So like so. And work across the whole row like so. And then the result will be this fun little, well, sawtooth or picot edge. And this can be very, very nice. So for the cuff of a pair of socks, you get this wonderful little edge here. You can even use, because there is a little pocket here in between, you can even use that to insert a rubber band or so. So this is a very, very nice way to create a fold line. Another way, and I did it here with these socks here, another fold line would be a row of purl stitches. As you can see, this creates a much sharper fold line, but here this is also very fun and very, very long or old favorite of mine. So just in case you were wondering how this looks for socks, so these are some knee-high socks I knitted, well, ages ago. And here I have this, well, foldable cuff, and I finished it here using these little picots in here at the bottom as well. See, so it's kind of mirrored here, and then it creates this lovely little cuff. Another favorite cast-on technique for me is the Turkish cast-on. Why? Well, because it's outstandingly simple and it also works as a provisional cast-on. So I have two pairs of circular knitting needles here. These are some Knit Pro needles and these are the Chagu minis. Now I don't like Chagu because obviously there's nickel in it and well, Chinese company and stuff like that. But these minis are very, very nice for provisional cast-ons. So let's show you how to do that. So I hold both of my little needles here parallel, and then I start with a simple little slip knot any way you like. And now you simply need to wrap the yarn around the knitting needle once for every stitch you want to create. So once, twice, 3 times, 4 times and 5 times. I want to cast on 5 stitches here. I'm not counting the slip knot. And then I turn around, and now comes in the reason why I am actually using these shorties, because I'm pulling them through and let the cable dangle down. And now I simply knit into these stitches. It's a little bit, well, feels a little bit weird because they are so loose, but I'm knitting into these stitches, and then here this slip knot, this can be you can unravel that slip knot this is the easiest way to do it. So unravel the slip knot, and now you have 5 stitches on your needle and 5 stitches here on, well, provisional stitches on your cable. And then you simply knit across a couple of rows in garter stitch. So I created 1, 2, 3, 4 ridges here. And then this is your, because a lot of shawls start with a garter tab cast on, and this is actually it. So you start with a provisional cast on using the Turkish cast on, and then here's what I do. So I knit these 5 stitches, and then you use a knitting needle and you pick up here these outer these outer legs of your garter stitch selvage. I use a spare knitting needle here, but I mean, use whatever you prefer. You can actually use the other knitting needle here. So I have 4 ribs here, so I'm picking up 4 stitches here. And then I simply knit across here. It's easier if you use a thinner knitting needle, but there we go. And then you push these needles here back to the knitting needle and knit across. These small needles are kind of fiddly, but I mean, it's in this case just 5 stitches. And I mean, it doesn't look like much, but there you go. This here is your this here is your garter stitch or garter tab cast on, the easy way using the Turkish cast on method. Now, of course, the Turkish cast on can be used for a lot of other projects as well. So, for example, socks toe up. I personally never knit socks toe up, but well, almost never. But if you like to do that for whatever reason, then here's a tip. Start with a slip knot here around the top needle, and then simply wrap the yarn around the needle however many times you need stitches. So I'm going to do 6 stitches here. Then I turn the needles around, pull out the bottom needle. Pull out the bottom needle, and then I simply knit across those 6 stitches. Well, typically sometimes you start with 6, 8, 10. Here, when I come across the slip knot, I simply let that go and unravel it. And then here I pull back my knitting needle, because now I already did my cast on, and now we're back to doing magic loop. So these needles are back on the knitting needle. I turn the project around, pull the bottom needle out. Always do it in this order, otherwise you sometimes end up dropping stitches, and then you knit across. So often I hear people, well, I find the magic cast on is so difficult, I can't make it work. Well, then just use the Turkish cast on. Another transformational technique for me was when I learned using a sharp tapestry needle to weave in ends. So this is how my grandma taught me. And so I use a sharp tapestry needle, and then I will pierce here, for stockinette stitch at least, I will pierce here, right, see through these purl bumps. Go super fast. Pull it through, massage things out so it's relaxed in the fabric, and then I will pick a different rib here and follow it in the other direction one more time. Then again stretch things out, so you don't want your tail to constrict your fabric. And then what's very important is that you don't cut it right at the base. You can even cut it in a frayed way. So if it's a feltable fiber, cotton isn't feltable, but if it's a feltable fiber, you cut it in a frayed way, and then this will also kind of felt together with the fabric. That's how I weave in ends. So whenever someone says, well, I hate weaving in ends, I go like, what's there to hate? It's so easy, so simple, it goes so fast. Why hate it? If my project is in ribbing, like the swatch here from earlier where I showed you how to do cables without a cable needle, then I will also pierce through the yarn, but I will follow these ribs here in a vertical manner, like so. Pull the yarn through, massage things out there. It's not really visible, at least, especially on the wrong side. And then I will follow the same column or the adjacent column. In this case, there is no adjacent column. I will follow that in the other direction. Here is another tip. If your tail is too short, then weave the needle through first and then pull through. There you go. So, and that's how I do it for ribbing. And if it's garter stitch, as in this case here, then I will typically follow here. So in between these ridges there are all those knit stitches, and I will pierce right through them and hide the tail here. And again, it's too short, but again, you know, this is a super simple trick for tails that are too short. And then this is how I do it for garter stitch. Also very, very unnoticeable, because typically then the tail sort of is hidden in these little valleys. That's how I do it for garter stitch. I'm reasonably sure that you know that you can fix a dropped stitch here using a crochet hook. Works for stockinette stitch, garter stitch, even brioche stitch. I have videos that show you all of those techniques. Now personally, the days where I make tons of mistakes are really long gone, but I want to show you a couple of my personal favorites. So sometimes I drop a stitch. Maybe I've been picking up stitches, or I've been talking with someone, whatever. I drop a stitch. Then I don't actually go hunting for my crochet hook. Instead, I slip the stitch back to the knitting needle. Then I slip the strand back to the knitting needle so it leans towards the left, and then I simply pass over and continue knitting. There is the fixed stitch. Also works like if this was supposed to be a purl stitch. Well, then I go into the stitch here below, and bring the strand here towards the front. There is my fixed purl stitch. And if this needs to be a knit stitch, then I lift it back like so, bring the strand to the back. Here this needs to be, of course, left lean, the leading leg needs to be in front, like so. And it even works a little bit. It works if it's 2 rows below. So say it's 2 rows that unraveled. Well, then you need to find the strand that is below, lift that back, and then lift the other leg back. And if you didn't split the yarn, it will look good as new. That's how I actually fix mistakes without a crochet hook. And another favorite method when it comes to fixing mistakes, or rather my stitch definition, involves a knitting needle. So all stitches in a row are connected. So if I pull out a stitch like so, well, I can create this big loop here. However, I can also redistribute this slack here by here, going into each little stitch individual and carrying whatever I stole over to the side, and they're good as new. I have shown this before, but I really want to emphasize that I couldn't think of a single project in the past decade where I have not employed this technique. So here is a lovely sock I knitted a couple of weeks ago. Looks nice, yeah, really kind of nice. But previously in this video you already saw these socks, and this is how they look on the knitting needles. Quite a different picture, wouldn't you say? So what I did, and this took an hour or so, this is a very rustic, plastic-free, plant-based, plant-dyed sheep wool yarn, Corriedale to be very specific. And so there are many stitches here that look less than ideal. So what do? I fix them individually. This takes a lot of time, like really a lot of time, but it's what you have to do if you want the perfect stitch definition, despite working with a yarn that is maybe not perfectly spun, not superwash, not, I mean, you know, preferences differ, and some say, well, this already looks perfectly fine for me, or some might even say, I wish I could knit that evenly. My projects look a lot more irregular. But that's what I do for every single project. And then let's stop here. After blocking or so, this here is the result. This is, as you can see, the exact same yarn, the exact same pattern, the exact same needle size. That's the difference. But the difference is tedious and a lot of work. And here is a little bonus tip. As I said, I simply failed at counting. In what feels like another lifetime, I studied chemistry, and we learned some pretty advanced math, quantum mechanics, and so on. So I have no issue whatsoever with numbers, math, charts, geometry, or whatever. Yet when I need to cast on more than 20 stitches, I simply cannot do it correctly the first time. I mean, not even if my life depended on it. So when I count, I always group my stitches, and I personally count, and I've shown this before, I count in 2s and 3. 2, 3 is 5, 2, 3 is 10. 2, 3 is 15, 2, 3 is 20. And then I place a stitch marker. So even if I'm later on, maybe I need to count 200 stitches and then I'm unsure, did I count the right number of stitches? Then I can just recount. 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. Oh yeah, I had 20. And then of course you continue. That's how I do it. You can also do it vertically. So you add a stitch marker here, that's where you start, and then 2 and 3 and 2 and 3 is 10, 2 and 3 and 2 and 3 is 20, and then you would place, and I just have this one single stitch marker here, you would place another stitch marker and so on. And really I try to be as smart as possible to aid my counting. So let's suppose I've knitted these socks ages ago and I want to know, well, how many stitches did I cast on? So I place one stitch marker, and then I know that these ribs here are always 5 stitches wide, 3 knit stitches, 2 pull stitches. Well, then I count the ribs instead and not individual stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pierce the knitting here so I don't get lost. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 18 little ribs times 4, that's how many stitches I cast on for these socks here. This little trick really saved my sanity, because it's like that. If I cannot read my knitting, I am literally screwed. I cannot follow a pattern. It just doesn't work properly. I mean, I can read it, obviously. I can read the chart. I have no issue with that. But I cannot follow it, because I guess I'm a bit too easily, oh look there, a squirrel. And yeah, kind of, that's how I am. Anyway, those were my personal favorite techniques. Again, if you have anything to add, then comment now. I'm sure the other people watching will find it super helpful. I also want to add a little disclaimer. These were my personal favorite techniques. That doesn't make them the best. You might favor different patterns, different yarns, knit with a different knitting style, and on top of that, your aspirations might be different as well. Knitting is a hobby, and with a hobby, you are in control. As long as you only knit for yourself, it's all your decision. I might love lifted increases, swear by them, rarely knit anything else. maybe you don't. I'm pretty sure we can all sit next to each other at the local knitting meetup, at a yarn festival, without me glancing over and going like, yeah, of course you're doing it all wrong. You know, that's not how knitting is. The main reason why I'm recording this video is that I do get these questions a lot. Norman, what is the best cast-on? What is the best way to bind off? What is the neatest way to increase? I do get these questions. Typically, it's beginners that ask these questions, but I can well understand them. If you want to improve your knitting, you are desperate for the knowledge, of a professional knitter that can show you a different approach. And of course you approach them and go like, okay, teach me. Ultimately, any experienced knitter will be able to confirm this. You have to knit your own swatches or your own projects. Try out different techniques. And then you can decide, this is a technique that works well for me, for my hands, for my knitting style, and a technique I feel looks nice. Because, we don't all walk into the same store or into a museum and all like the same thing, or in a movies or whatever. So why on earth should we all like the same cast-ons or bind-offs? A lot of them are ornamental. Of course, preferences differ, and luckily I do not want to and cannot tell you what you should or shouldn't like. And let's just phrase it like that in these times and ages. I think it's best it stays that way, that someone else cannot tell you what you should or shouldn't like. Anyway, happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.